We had our first conference here back in 2009, and that's a while ago. And since then, we've had new growers. We went around and we talked about all the different places where rice is being grown in the Northeast. And we have all these new growers coming on board who've had several years of growing rice. And we're getting to the point where we want to keep a record of this information, what each farmer is doing, how they're doing with growing rice, what they're experimenting in, so that we have a record of what has happened, and also so that we can show new growers and new people interested in what is available. And so we've been thinking about this a lot. So I'm going to present about what we know about growing rice in the Northeast so far, and what data we want to collect. And then the second half of my presentation is going to talk a little bit about seed saving, since that has been an issue that has come up in the past, and we couldn't find someone to come talk about it, so I did the research and tried to get the information so that we could have a talk about seed saving here today, and that the farmers here in the Northeast, we don't have a commercial source of seed right now, so we're primarily saving our own seed and distributing amongst ourselves. So how to do that in a way that we're not spreading diseases or we're not losing the purity of our seed. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and I hope we can have a little bit of a discussion, because we do have a lot of people here who know a lot about seed, and maybe we can get to a point where there'll be a document that I can put on the website talking all about seed saving. So I'm going to cover the Northeast climate and a growing degree day map that we created to kind of explain the climate and how it's different across the Northeast, because the climate in Maine is totally different than the climate, where Jim is in New Jersey or Pennsylvania. He can grow varieties that we can't grow even here on Occoquan Farm. And then how we want to go about the data collection, and we're thinking about, and we've developed a 5-variety rice panel that we want all the growers to grow. I'll talk more about that, but so that we can have data that's comparable and we can compare across the Northeast. And then seed saving, as I mentioned. So we all know rice grows in a range of climates across the world, in different environments, different crop management techniques, a whole diversity. Here in the Northeast, we are limited by the climate, so the cool temperatures and the length of the short growing season, the length of this growing season. And a way that other farmers have used to kind of figure out how their crops will fare in a particular climate is the idea of growing degree days. So this it works really well in our climate because the temperature is the main limitation. There are some other limitations that we talked about, stresses, but climate seems to be a big one, and for the rice plant to develop and mature within our climate, it needs a certain amount of heat accumulation or temperature accumulation through the growing season. So growing degree days seems to be a good way of explaining how rice grows throughout the Northeast. And we have the calculation up there, but basically you take daily temperatures through the growing season. We use a base of 50 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty common to calculate this. And with the help, you can't really see this map very well on this screen, but it shows up really nicely on the website, and it hasn't been advertised a lot because we're still working on developing it. But under the growing rice section on the website, this map is available. And thanks to our partnership with Susan, she had 2 people at Cornell who helped us collect data for, I think, over 500 sites, weather stations across the Northeast. This is data from, I think, 1981 through now, averaged out. So each of these sites is a location. The color is a spectrum. We did a spectrum of 4 increments of 500 growing degree days, and this is in Fahrenheit. And going from the coolest, which is the dark blue, so it's 500 to 1,000 growing degree days, to the highest, which is the dark red, 3,000 to 3,500. So you can, even just looking at this, you can see that there is a range across the Northeast, and we've tried to illustrate it with this graph.
Is there a reference where we can find out what some of those locations are? Because they're
Oh, yes.
right near me.
Yeah. So I forgot to mention this. If you go on the website, we added a feature. It's an interactive feature. So if you hover over each of those dots, it says the location, it says the exact growing degrees for that location, and elevation. Because elevation is also another factor. It's not just latitude across the Northeast, it's elevation. And one interesting location is the darkest blue dot in northern Vermont. We were looking at the data and we were like, why is that so low? It's a point on Mount Mansfield. So it's probably not where you're going to grow rice, but it's interesting to look because it's a really high elevation. So how much elevation factors into climate? Yes.
Why do you work in Fahrenheit?
Because we're in the United States and that's what we're comfortable with. Maybe in the future we can make it.
Because the IRA people will have to convert everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
We could just add a converter there.
Yeah, we could. Yeah, we haven't really thought about that, and now that we have people from Canada interested, we should probably include that more. Yeah.
It's also, like, the only part I know there is western Massachusetts, but you follow the Connecticut River in the valley, especially down by the Holyoke Range, which is maybe halfway between north and south, and there's some of the world's best farmland, and you go, like to where I live, 10, 15 miles back from the river, and you're 1,000 feet higher, and it's a totally different climate zone, and it's very localized.
Yes.
And part of what has helped us is being in an area that's been farmed for 300 years, because it's down in the valley, and so there are farmers who know exactly what they can grow, what they can't grow, and we're growing rice in what, you know, the guy says, well, this is the wettest spot, it's worthless, you know, if you want water, try there. And so I can see this as a guide, but it seems like talking to farmers, at least in areas where people still farm, there's no substitute for that.
Yeah.
I mean, but how can you quantify that and make it scientific?
Yeah, well, one hope that we have to further enhance this map is to add all the locations, like your farm, where you're growing, what the climate is there, and what varieties you're able to grow. And I'll talk a little bit more when we get to the data sheet that we want the farmers to help us collect data with. But we want to include all those farms. There will be a dot for Occoquan Farm, and you can pop up and get all the information. So we want to improve this map. This is just like a start, and we want to, with your support, we're going to make this better and make it a useful tool for even, you know, people from all over. Sometimes I get emails from people in Nebraska, and, you know, they want to grow rice. So this is a tool for them to help them. Yes.
Perhaps I misunderstood. I was assuming that each of those points somebody's growing rice there, but that's not the case.
This is just climate data.
That's just climate.
This
Weather
is
station.
This is what we
Plans for
could
the
do
future.
sitting at Cornell without any input from you. We
I
could
see.
do
It
that.
was an academic exercise. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Does anybody know enough to say if that's Martha's Vineyard, why there are two dots? Since is it because of the uplands and the maritime?
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
We'd have to hover over the map and
Close to the Gulf Stream.
There you go.
So
Leave that one. I'll tell you another.
I wanted to use this map to illustrate how it could be used to talk about what varieties, rice varieties, are able to grow in different locations. So the first example I wanted to use is this farm, because in 2009 we actually we had a weather station here and we collected temperature data. And in that year we got growing degree days of 1,906. So it's pretty cool. If you look at the map, it would be one of the light blue dots. There's not actually a dot for it, but it would be a light blue dot. And then, as we've talked about a lot, the varieties that mature here are the ones from northern Japan, from Hokkaido. Although we can grow Dvorsky here, which is a popular variety because Christian has been growing it for a long time, and the seed has kind of disseminated, but it's a uniquely different looking plant than many of the Hokkaido varieties, because it has a nice along like a feathery ends to the seeds. And you can actually see there's a little plot out here in the paddy, so you can look and see what Dvorsky looks like. But we include it because it's kind of a unique rice variety that we can grow in this climate compared to the temperate japonicas that we can grow here. So from this data, you can look at this map and pretty much assume that most of the northern half of the Northeast, if you wanted to try rice, you should try these Hokkaido varieties, and those are your best bet. To think more about the southern half, I wanted to include a little data from Northern California and compare it to Northern California. So from Jim Hill, he told me that Rio Vista was one of the cooled spots in California. And I just went online and figured out growing degree days at that location. Average of the last few years is around a little under 3,000. So it's pretty high. It would be one of the lighter orange, orangish dots on that map.
Excuse me, can you
Yep.
take one step back and tell us what growing degree days means?
Yes. So growing degree days is degrees of temperature accumulation through the growing season. So they have growing degree days for different crops. And for rice, we did through the growing season for rice here in the Northeast from May to September is mainly when they're growing. And
Number of degrees above 50 degrees.
yeah, so it's a base of 50. Yeah. So it's related to how well the rice is going to grow.
Do you take the temperature at a particular time of each day, or do you average it over the day, or what do you do?
Usually they calculate a max and a min, and they average the max and the min over the course of the day.
Any particular time of day?
I don't know how. I think the temperature data we used was periodically through the hourly, and they averaged it out, or they took the max through the day and the min through the day. I'm not sure. It's a lot of data that they.
So we really don't know. I'm sorry, I'm a mathematician. I'm going to be.
Standard way for calculating temperature or recording temperature, you take the highest temperature of the day, the number in the day that occurs,
Okay.
and the lowest.
Okay, good. That's
Global standard.
So it's, whether
Thank you,
light or
Randy.
dark doesn't make any difference, right?
Every day has a maximum and minimum. You take the average, minus 53, and accumulate that time.
I got that. I got that.
I got the math
What I didn't get was that you don't care about what time of day the maximum occurs or the minimum occurs. Okay.
Yeah, because night temperatures are crucial to the rice plant development too. Okay, so Rio Vista. So in California, they're growing some of the mainland Japanese varieties, sushi rices like Akita-komachi, Koshihikari, and we actually have a little pot that my father grew of Akita-komachi here. So you can see the difference in how the rice is developing. They're just starting to head right now, whereas the Yuki-hikari is pretty fully headed. So you can see the distinct difference. And here at Akogui Farm, most years it doesn't mature fully, Akita-komachi, but warm years sometimes it does well. So we're thinking that that variety especially will do well in the southern half of the Northeast. And then maybe some of the medium grain, cold tolerant, early maturing varieties from California will maybe do well in the southern half of the Northeast. And we're hoping that through data collection in the next few years, we will be figuring this out, how well they will actually do. Because that's a wealth of information. If we can take from California, then that's a resource that many years of work that they've been doing that we can tap into. Okay. So just if you're curious about finding growing degree days at your location, the weather.com has a nice interface where you can go and just type in your location. It routes to the nearest weather station and will give you growing degree days if you want. Just for a quick, because not everyone has a weather station or is collecting temperature data at their location. I think you can search for it, the growing degree days calculator, and find it. So to further improve the growing degree day map, like I mentioned before, we want all the growers to grow this panel, this 5-variety panel, and we tried to pick from early maturing to what we think will be late maturing here in the Northeast. So Yuki Hikari is one of the earliest. It's a short grain variety from Hokkaido. It's the one that is being used in Susan's lab to breed the aromatic and purple pericarp into. So we thought that was a good one. Dvorskin, because it's a uniquely different plant. It's from a Russian variety. And then these two, Akita-komachi and Koshihikari, are varieties grown in California. that are sushi rices. So there's already a market for them. So if you can grow them, they are good rices. And then we wanted to include a medium grain, cold tolerant rice from Northern California, just as a spectrum to see how they fare across the Northeast. So to your question, we're working on getting these seeds available for the 2014 growing season. Some of them are already available through the USDA from the National Small Grains Collection. The only one which isn't is Dvorskian, but we have sources from Fedco Seeds and Seed Savers Exchange. So that variety is available there through those means.
I think Koshikari is available from Kisazawa Seeds from Canton.
Right. Yeah, as well. So we'll get that information to anyone who's interested. We're still kind of fine-tuning what we want to do for the next growing season, but we want to get the growers on board so that we can launch this effort and have, at the end, hopefully, of 2014, we have all this data that we can include on the website and kind of round out. Actually, this grant is ending in June of 2015, so next year will be our last conference probably.
What we say is it's up for renewal.
Yeah, so our last conference for sure. So hopefully we'll have this data for the ending of this grant, and maybe we'll push further efforts. So.
What we have to say is that next year we're going to invite the NSF officers who will be determining in part the renewal, and I think we really want to bring them here. So if you guys are if you buy in, it's your conference, we're trying to serve your needs, but if this is something you want to do, that action this year would be profound. Very, very important.
Can you say more about why this selection? I mean, given where I live, I'm looking at the 5 different varieties from northern Japan and thinking, I want to select a couple of those to try, and yet only one of those is up there.
Right. So this is a way to compare locations across the Northeast. If we don't all grow the same varieties, then it's harder to compare. Yeah, exactly. But yes, where you are in Maine, probably only 2 of those varieties will mature. The Russian and the Ukiari.
But we can provide you with
other seeds,
recommendations for additional seed that we would predict for you.
This is just for this effort.
I want that.
Yeah, so we can help with that too.
Mia, are we presuming that this is all going to be flood culture, or can we do other cultures too?
There's other cultures going on. So, and even if you want to just help by growing rice in, a 5-gallon bucket for information, I think that's an aspect we'd want to include as well.
Sure. That we can do.
Yes.
I'm wondering how much of a standard protocol you have here for the way you do this, because just to give you an example, in California, if you keep your rice non-flooded for say the first 3 or 4 weeks, there's a delay in maturity of as much as 10 days to 2 weeks. So you could really have this data confounded by the different management practices. So I'd recommend a protocol. I don't know, maybe you have that coming up. But.
Yeah, maybe that will be something we'll fine-tune over the winter, or maybe we can develop a couple protocols, and for paddy rice, this is the recommendation, and then we could compare those farms, and then if other people want to do other management things. So
we want to be serious for the NSF, we should have the protocol.
Sure. We'll develop them.
We'll work on it. This is still a work in progress.
Make you do the permutation calculation.
I've already found out that due to permutations, you don't exist.
So to go along with growing the Vice Variety Panel, we have been working also on a data sheet, a record-keeping tool. There was a 1-page back and front handout of what we've gotten so far, working with Susan and Anna and a few other people, of what we think will be relatively easy for people to record over the growing season, so that we can have data that we can compare. And basically this means taking some measurements at the beginning of the growing season, germination dates, transplant dates, things about your rice paddy or your rice field, and then data during panicle development, which is the heading, when it's heading. And I'll talk, since that's a really important time and it's a piece of information that's used to compare rice varieties all over. Researchers, farmers use that piece of data when the variety is heading. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then after harvest and when the grain has been dried, you know, there'll be a bunch of measurements to take at that point too. Okay, so just quickly, the rice plant, many of you may know this, but there's a wide spectrum of knowledge in this room, so I just wanted to cover that a tiller is composed of the root, stem, and leaves, and then some tillers will produce panicles, which are the seed head of the rice. So in this plant, this example, there's 5 tillers, and they all have panicles. So when you're doing your record keeping, this is one of the things you're going to have to figure out is how to look at tillers. And a lot of rice plants, if you look at even here in the paddy, it's going to be difficult. It may be a little challenging to count all the tillers, but that's the basic idea. And then on the panicle are the seed growing parts of the plant. This is called the spikelets. And I don't have a picture for this. Oh, I'll talk about this later, so I'm getting ahead of myself. So the heading date is when the panicles it's called the panicle exertion phase. So if you look at the diagram on the far right, this is before heading has occurred. It's the booting stage when it's kind of fattening up and getting ready to come out. And then the second diagram to the right is what they call partially exerted. So heading date, when you're talking with agronomists or researchers, is when half of the panicles have partially exerted. So it's kind of a tricky thing to measure, and it'll take some experience. But I think that when we're first doing, for the first year, maybe taking the date of when you first start seeing signs of heading, and then heading can take anywhere from 10 to 14 days. So you can keep an eye on it day to day, and then when it's completely headed, you'll have a date. If you don't get exactly 50%, then we can maybe work it out. But we need that date to be able to compare the data. And then the diagrams to the far left are all further along in heading. Okay, and then one other concept I wanted to go over for the data collection was lodging. This is when the rice plants fall before harvest. And there's some good examples of it in the rice paddy actually here. So I didn't know that was going to happen, but there's some examples of it. And for here, it's due because my father was experimenting this year, and he increased the fertilizer application by 50%. And what that can do is make the rice grow quickly and then fall over. So you'll see some varieties have issues with lodging here at Akogi Farm. But usually it occurs with rain or wind or heavy weather. You'll see it in other areas. It's not as common for those environmental aspects here in the Northeast. But when we had Hurricane Irene a few years ago, there was some farmers experienced lodging because of all the wind and rain. And then we have a spectrum, so it's relatively easy to measure lodging from 1 to no lodging, 5 completely flat. So I think, yes?
Is lodging normal in normal conditions?
I think it depends upon the variety and how it's growing. So, and I guess it would be difficult to define normal conditions because it's influenced by fertilizer application and other factors. So there's some, I guess what I could say is there's some varieties that deal with or don't tend to lodge as much as others. But it's very variable based on environmental conditions, right? Is that?
Well, we should also, Dave McKill in his presentation this morning, he showed you the IR8, which is the high-yielding rice for Asia from the Green Revolution. The main feature of that rice was it dwarfed the plant so that it wouldn't lodge. It was really an anti-lodging thing, so that you could still get the yield off those plants.
But when it lodges, you lose the yield?
Usually it goes down and then
Rots in the ground or something, or what?
And it'll germinate in the paddy. It's wet.
Oh, it'll germinate.
Depends on when the lodging occurs.
But and the grain filling is affected in the quality of the grain and everything. And I guess it's really a kind of an interesting question as to whether it's normal, because Traditional rice, in many, many cases, will lodge much more readily whether you fertilize it or don't. But typically, if you fertilize it, a traditional rice variety, it will always lodge if you fertilize it. So it's always been a limitation for yield, is that lodging was a limitation, and when you tried to fertilize it to get more yield, you just got it lodging. So the idea of having a strong stem by dwarfing the plant and breeding for stem strength has also been a key feature of hybrids, because the early hybrids that had these huge yields, the stem was too weak to hold up that yield. So the breeders are always working with the problem of lodging and fertilizer, and I don't know if normal is a word, but for this problem, but for your environment, you always have to think about lodging somewhere.
And this is our farm. You can go over there, lots of lodging you can tell. Because this year I wanted to see how each variety reacts for the overdose of fertilizer. So I did 50% more fertilizer than the last 7 years or 6 years. So many is falling down now. So it's a nice timing of it.
Okay, while everyone can hear you, can you say what kind of fertilizer you use?
I use dried chicken manure.
Cheap.
No, different company.
Oh, new company?
They're from New York State. Slightly less nutrients, but you can count as similar.
Me, I'm thinking if lodging is a piece of data that you want to collect, you should also know what the fertility is that each person has added, since there's such a direct relationship, and perhaps the flooding timing, because if you lower the flooding, dry things out toward the end, then there's so many factors.
There are a lot of factors, and a lot of those are included in our data sheet. I didn't want to go over every single parameter because that would just be a little overkill.
Are we going to have a simple manual or something for this?
Yes. We'll work on it. Yeah.
We're going to be building, my group will be building a model once we have enough data. We'll be trying to model this so that, because it's not a linear, these are non-linear relationships, but we're going to try to provide models for different regions and conditions. But that's why as much of the detail about your environment and your management practices as possible will allow us to try to start to accumulate that information. And that's the kind of thing NSF would like to see, because then it becomes predictive and then you can fine-tune it as you go. And then that helps the breeders. That's feedback for them as well. So I think you can start to see that relationships are complex here. And at the beginning, every variable, just too many independent variables. But once you fit them into a model, you'll start to see how tweaking one variable has a cascade of effect. And on some varieties, it'll be different than others. So
for our data, the immediate thing, we've got to have a guide of how we're doing it.
Well, you got to have
That's what I'm asking, because I know nothing about it.
But let's say we give you a guide, we still need to know what you did, because nobody does. Nobody does it the same. Okay.
So I think this is all I'm going to talk about the rice variety panel and the observation sheet and data collection. And we'll be working on this over the course of the winter to have it ready for next growing season, and we want your participation and help with this. So we will be in touch. The second half, let's see. Yeah, so the second half of my presentation is going to focus just on the seed saving. And as I mentioned before, this is so that we have knowledge about how to properly save seed, because we're all doing it in different ways probably right now. And I spend a lot of time researching from Erie, as well as there's a seed saving manual for small scale from Uganda that I was referenced to. So I tried to draw resources from all over and develop somewhat of a format for how to save seed in our climate. And obviously there's no document that covers that right now. And I am not an expert on this. I'm learning, as many of you guys are. I just have connections to people who know a lot. So I'm hoping that this is also a work in progress. We may have a discussion here and talk over some of the things. And then, over the course of the winter, the next few months, I can develop something that's a final that we can put on the website to help everyone. So rice is most of the time a self-pollinated crop. crop. In nature, it will breed true to type. And this makes it a little bit easier as a crop to save seed from year to year compared to other crops that outcross a lot. And so true to type means that its offspring are the same as the mother plant in most cases, and I'll talk more about that. So why is rice self-pollinated? And this is because, so this is a diagram of the spikelet, which there are lots of spikelets on a panicle. And it's self-pollinated most of the time because when the pollen falls off the anthers to pollinate the female part, the stigma, most of the time it happens before the spikelet has even opened. So there's no way it could get pollen from another plant or another source. Sometimes it occurs at the same time it's opening, and then at a few times, or a small percentage of the time, it occurs after it's opened. But if you manage the way you grow rice correctly and keep varieties separate, then even if it's pollinated by a neighboring plant, you can be pretty sure that it's going to have offspring that resemble the parent plant.
Will you talk about how separate is separate?
Yep. I'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, so for my research, these seem to be the major areas that you need to consider for growing rice for seed. And I'm not going to cover all aspects of growing rice because that would take forever, and a lot of it has been covered in previous conferences. So if it's an interest of yours, you can look at the videos or the presentations from prior conferences. But I wanted to talk about some aspects that maybe are a little bit different, or aspects that you need to spend special attention to because you're, say, growing rice for seed. And these are the areas that I'm going to go over. So choice of land and land preparation. There didn't seem to be a lot about this other than you need fertile land with sufficient water. If you're growing paddy rice, you need soils with high clay content to hold the water. And a level rice field. Even for growing rice for grain, this is a pretty important issue. It helps keep the water at a uniform depth. If the water's at a uniform depth, it keeps weeds, makes weed management easier. Water conservation or water is conserved, and it allows the plants to mature pretty uniformly. So this is something you want if you want to have good seed. Okay. And so for seed prep, if you want to have good seed, you got to start with good seed. This is probably one of the harder parts for us here in the Northeast because we don't have a source of commercial seed. We have you can get small packets of seed through the National Small Grains Collection through the USDA. For seeds like Dvorskian, there are some commercial seed houses that are, or seed distributors, I should say, that are giving seed out. Like Fedco Seed and Seed Savers Exchange. And then I know that a lot of us are growing seed and distributing amongst ourselves. So if we try to make that seed truthful and preserve it as best as we can, then that's a good way of getting seed. And these are some of the aspects of good quality seed. So fully mature, well-filled, you want nice full grains, uniform in size, healthy, so no diseases, no discoloration. Pure, that refers to genetic purity, so trying to keep the varieties pure. And high viability, you want seeds that have high germination rate, grow prolifically, and that usually refers to the moisture content. One aspect of it is the moisture content of the seed when you're storing.
Hey Mia, just a quick question. I'm wondering if anybody else has had this experience with the USDA, those seeds, because I've just noticed periodically looking over my field, I'll have a variety and 100 of the plants or 200, whatever it is that I've got in there, and all of a sudden I'll see one that's twice as tall and clearly is not the same variety.
Yeah.
Are they imperfect in their seed collection and whatnot, or was that mine?
I don't know. I'm not sure about that.
How do you sort it to begin with? How do you keep it pure? I mean, you're going to get some cross-fertilization, aren't you, even a little bit?
Yeah, it's always, I mean, I think that the USDA is just conserving what they were given. So if they were given a mixed bag, you're going to get a mixed bag. And everything comes in and breeders try to purify it. And then there's some risk that it's going to outcross and you have to rogue it. And that's the easiest way to do it is pull out the off types and don't let them go to seed for next generation. And if you're a seed producer, you have to rogue in order to continue to produce the seed, or it'll
because rice is not open pollinated in the sense of most plants. Is there no minimum number of plants that you collect from for a good genetic mix?
Yeah, so that's something that we've had discussions about, and we've talked about saving or growing 6, just a row, like 6 plants even, but not saving from a subset, not from all. Or growing, I'll talk a little bit more about this too, but growing in a plot and then saving from the middle of the plot so that you don't, hopefully there's a buffer, an edge buffer, and if the plant is cross-pollinating with a neighboring plant, it's hopefully if you save from the middle, it's of the same variety. So there are ways, I guess, strategies of trying to. So the distance also between varieties is, try to maximize the distance between varieties if you're doing a single row is another way. So there's strategies, and it's not going to work the same for every farm, but there are ways of trying to make sure that we keep our seed purity.
So was your question about bottleneck possibly? What's a minimum tipping point where you start regressing the line?
Yeah, where you don't get your genetic range.
Yeah, we talked, Susan talked about it, and she said 6 plants a while ago, but I don't know.
We're talking about inbred varieties here. If you're talking about populations, it's a completely different game, but we're just restricting this to varietals, which are inbred varieties, where what you hope, I think what all of you hope as farmers is that if you ask for Yukichikari, you get Yukichikari. Because if you ask for Yukichikari and what you get is some mixture of Carolina Gold, Yukichikari, and something else that happened to be in the field, you're not gonna be able to repeat what you expected, and you've gone to all the trouble of planting it before you realize it's not what it won't grow or it won't flower. So what we're trying to talk about here is just maintenance of pure lines, meaning inbred varieties, so that you get what you expect. But there's a whole nother dimension which we could talk more about, which is when you make a cross or you try to talk about populations of traditional varieties, which are populations. But these are inbred lines, so.
Yeah, okay.
Okay,
thank you.
So I wanted to go over seed certification a little bit because it's a major factor in seed distribution throughout California, Arkansas, all over the world. There are classes of seed, and here in the Northeast, of course, we don't have it. But we're hoping that I got some of my information from how to grow certified seed. So there are different classes. The breeder seed is, of course, the seed that comes directly from the breeder. It's grown in an institution. It's probably the product of a breeding project pair, and the seed that they develop. And then foundation seed is the offspring of that. So usually it's an institution or something that's growing the seed out, and there's protocols they're following, they're getting inspected. There's a whole process of preserving that seed. And register seed is the progeny of foundation seed. It's usually grown by select farmers for seed companies, I'm guessing, to distribute. And then certified seed is usually grown for commercial distribution to give to the farmers. So it can be progeny of foundation or registered seed. It's a little bit above what we need to know for the moment, but I just wanted to highlight that there are protocols out there in other rice growing regions of strict guidelines of how they save their seed. And we're just hoping to keep maybe at the certified or a little bit below that level with managing how we grow rice so that we're not spreading diseases or reducing genetic purity.
So each of those is a further generation, yeah. Thanks, Peter.
And the certified seed, should anyone want to make a business of certified seed, a good grower can have a certified seed production farm where they grow the seeds that the community needs, and their costs should be covered because you pay for the certified seed because it's been grown, robed, managed, and it's certified to be the quality and the identity that we're trying to preserve. So for any of you for whom, you know, entrepreneurship is your game, think about becoming a certified seed person. I don't think your market's very big yet, but you can learn a lot by becoming a certified seed producer.
So once you have your seed, there are a few steps that you can take before planting. And one of them is seed cleaning. Usually, if you're getting it from a reputable source, you probably don't have to do a lot of removing of debris in your seed. But one aspect you might want to do is remove poorly filled grains, because we want the grains that are fully developed. And there are a couple ways you can do this. You can just soak them in water. The seeds that float are the ones that are poorly filled. The ones that soak are the ones that you will want to plant. And if you wanted to do it even more accurately, I guess, or better, you can use a saltwater solution. So, and then rinse off the salt water before you go to the next step. Okay, and then I was looking to try to find a way that maybe we could help prevent disease. It's not an issue so much at the moment, but there is some research about disinfecting rice seed using hot water. So if this is a concern, you can prevent many seed-borne diseases by using hot water. And there's a certain temperature range that you need to keep the water in. You soak the seed. It should be around 140 degrees Fahrenheit. And after 5 minutes, you cool the seed. And you can either dry them in the shade or go on to the next step if you're already planning on pre-germinating. Yeah.
I'll just mention that every single seed that comes into the United States from overseas goes through a hot water treatment of 5 minutes or 10 minutes at 62 to 63 degrees and is then dried. So everything you get into the U.S. has already been through this process. And in addition now, those of us who are the quarantine stations for these seeds, we have to grow those seeds out when they come into the country. They have to be grown out under quarantine conditions, and we have to harvest seed off of a plant grown from those seeds before it can go in the field. So the U.S. has very strict quarantine and containment to be able to be sure that we're not introducing new diseases and new pests. But I also mention that to assure you that your seeds will germinate after you do this. It does not affect germination. And to give you one more little input, when it comes to me, because I'm a quarantine grow-out, I get the seed that's been dried down after it's been heat treated. I have to put it in the freezer at minus 20 degrees for 48 hours and then thaw it out before I plant it. So it's amazing what seeds, if they're dried correctly, and they should be dried before they're ever sent, you can boil them in hot water and then freeze them, and they still germinate. So it's just sort of interesting for everyone to realize that that's what they've been through before you get them.
Do you mean boil? Because you're only at 140 degrees.
No, you're not boiling. No, not boiling.
You're heating. You want the word heat, not boil.
Not boil.
Yeah, good. Good.
That helps me explain the Fed who came to my door last winter. I was trying to figure out where to get rice seeds. And I saw some on eBay, and I bought them. And about 3 weeks later, this guy comes to my door identifying himself as a USDA investigator, and there's a backup guy standing in the driveway, and he wants to know who I am, and is it true that I'm the same guy who bought seeds on eBay? And I took out everything I had, and he walked away with it, but he was very nice. About 2 weeks later, he came back, and he said he had sorted what was basically shipped from Thailand totally illegally, and some that he had determined they're American sources that must have complied with everything you're talking about, and those he gave me back.
How could he tell?
Pardon?
Tracking.
Yeah, the ones, and that's true, because the only ones I got back were the ones that had names of an American company on the envelope. And everything else, apparently, if in doubt, he grabbed it. But some of it he had tracked all the way from Thailand through the eBay source, and then apparently gone to eBay and essentially shown the badge and said, we want the names and addresses of everybody who bought the seed, but I don't know what he did to try to shut down the source in Thailand.
Yeah,
he
so
was real serious. And he told
yeah,
me,
it's a serious issue, and it.
Just one question. Is this to protect just the rice growers in the U.S. or all grain growers?
Well, all grain growers, everyone goes through the same thing, but rice is much more heavily quarantined than other grains. Much more heavily quarantined, because we have a very, very vulnerable rice production system where our genetic diversity is low, and we have no native diseases for rice. We've had some introduced, and we had to deal with it, but we're trying to keep them out.
Right.
I understand.
So, Susan, is this disinfection by heat distinct from by freezing? Can one do either or?
Well, no. So this is for mostly fungi, bacteria, and the freezing is for the panicle mite, which has an egg which is resistant to this temperature. But it's not resistant to freezing. So I don't really know. I know why we do both, but I don't know whether the freezing would be enough to get rid of this. But this happens at the border, so.
If people around here had to deal with mite or disease that have been growing in the Northeast, this is something practice that people are doing right now that's happening on this farm? Is that?
I don't know. I didn't notice yet.
Okay. Do you go through these steps where you heat it and then you put it in the freezer?
I only does for the water treatment and the floating one.
Okay.
But I'm thinking this, like boiled water. To use.
I think if you're I think if you do certified seed, you'll have to do all that.
Okay, but if we're just going small scale now, we don't worry about
That's on the boil, that's on the temperature.
Apart from all of this, how many years does rice generally stay viable in seed?
So from what I read, rice loses viability significantly after 11 months of storage. So the best, that's what I read. I don't know, is that wrong?
What the storage conditions are.
Okay,
so if they're stored dry, we usually dry them down to 14% moisture, and then you can put them, as long as you keep them dry and cool, they will store fine. At Cornell, I keep my seeds, I dry them down to 14% moisture. I put them in, basically in what do you call that, desiccant. I put desiccant in the containers, and then I keep them at 4 degrees, because I don't have any long-term storage. And at 4 degrees, they'll keep probably 5 years.
4 degrees centigrade?
Yeah.
So do they lose any viability in that time, germination?
5 years, you start to see that go down.
So what dormancy is attendant in that routine?
There's no dormancy.
You don't induce dormancy because of that? Okay, that's cool.
So Susan, for a home grower, the dryness, what's just like the home way to do that?
If you dry down your seed, you can, I mean, many people dry it in the sun and hold it, and it's just good for till the next year. Just don't keep it in a humid environment, and it'll be fine. In a cool, in this kind of environment, in a cool, shady, or home, but not in your attic, not where it's going to get hot and cold and hot and cold.
You can just get dry rice.
Say it again?
Dry rice.
Yeah, dry rice, or just refrigerated, a cold room, or...
One very simple test is called the tooth test. And that is if you dry it below 40, you want to be below 14 actually. If you get down to dry and you put it in your tooth and it cracks, then that means it's dry enough, and then put it in a cool
So if we're just saving seeds from our own gardens or wherever, should we be doing this before we plant seeds the following year?
I guess if you want to be safest, yes, you could do these things. This is more, the idea for this presentation is more for if we're distributing amongst ourselves to make sure that we're not, giving poor quality seed amongst ourselves, because that's a lot of how the seed distribution in the Northeast is happening at the moment. Yes.
Like I have some farmers, they have experience in rice for 40 years, and they said they never tried this in hot water and in freezer or something like that. They just save the seeds in and then before they put in the ground, they just do like in the muddy water. It grows nicely, and then we did last year in our farm, in New Farm, it's Burlington. We have like this much seeds. We didn't do anything, just put in the greenhouse and then bring and transplant in the, and that comes like 1/4 acres. And this year we have like 1/4 acres of seeds, like rice, that goes so well and so nicely. These folks, they're saying like they want to save that one for coming year, next year. That occupies 5 acres. That's what they are saying. So, you know, I don't know, like hot water and then degrees, they are not experienced with that.
As long as you have no diseases, as long as you have no problem.
Yeah. We don't have any problem till now. Like last year we experienced, and then this year we set that seed and we do this year, and then still the field looks very great.
Right, but if you get a problem, you don't want to ship it to someone else. So this is more for people who want to share seed, and they want to be sure they don't inherit a problem.
Even this is for your own use?
We do it for everything.
Same thing sometimes happens.
Yeah. Because there's rhizoctonia.
You don't know till problem happens.
I had a question about, well, I don't know, how, it doesn't sound like the problems are very common, but is there a resource on your website or that shows for scouting so that the problems would be obvious? Or is it something else you need to know what you're looking for?
So the rice panicle mite is a transparent microscopic insect that gets in the seed and punctures the seed when it's very young, and then fungus goes in. So one of the things you see is discolored black spots on seeds. Many people think it's rhizoctonia, but anyway, there's a fungal thing that gets in because the mite is there. For years, we didn't know how to handle that. We started these things, and we now have really nice clean seeds. So I can tell you that what happens is, in the beginning, when rice is new and we don't have diseases, everybody thinks it's just fine and easy, and you just pretend everything's always going to be fine and easy. But if you introduce these early, you'll avoid those problems. So we got shut down along with every other rice production greenhouse facility in the country about 5 years ago, I can't remember, for this rice panicle mite because it was discovered. But once we understood what to do and we started implementing, I mean, our seed production is much better quality now. So all I can say is I've come through it the hard way. And I suggest that this community just start to take these things now, and if you start this practice and you're careful, and then you can exchange seeds and you're not worried about it because you all have good practices, you'll be much better off than if you wait till you have a problem.
So can we get this, or maybe it exists somewhere, this protocol in writing that's accurate? I mean, it doesn't have the word boil in it, and it has the right temperatures, and for how long when you're freezing it. I mean, I see boil and I see 143 and I say, I can't believe it's up there because that doesn't make sense.
We can do.
Yeah, so the idea is to make this presentation into a document that we'll have on our website.
On the Akiego Farm Northeast Rice website?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
So I guess I have two questions. So freezing temperatures, you were freezing crazy low temperatures.
We just put it because that's where our...
Okay, so we can even, regular freezing works with that. And secondly, when you're getting seed from USDA...
Now the whole group is not hearing this, I wonder...
When you're getting seed from the USDA, I noticed that there were some acquisition dates, and for one of my seeds it was 1947. Is that seed truly from, because actually that particular one, I got two different versions. I got a 1980 version and this 47 version of this it's a risotto rice from Italy. And the 47 one didn't germinate very well. The 1980 one did pretty darn well. I mean, is that seed isn't that old?
So it may be that they haven't amplified that since 1947, but so they've kept it in cold storage.
So it's possible.
The cold storage that the USDA or that Erie keeps should last 50 years. So they think that's probably right on the edge, but they probably haven't rejuvenated it.
Okay.
And that's,
So it might have been from 47?
yeah,
Wow.
every 50 years.
Cold storage, huh?
Are you doing field now?
I got some.
So I guess we'll continue on. So usually here in the Northeast, we're pre-germinating our seed, soaking them till they're pipped or there's a little shoot coming out. And this increases germination and how well the seedlings establish. So I'm going to try to get through this quickly because it's really late and you guys are probably hungry. So you do submerge the seeds in water till you see shoots. You could do this in a pretty broad range of temperature. It seems to be optimum around 80, but you can just use room temperature water. We've had discussions about this. You can use room temperature.
Like sprouting.
Yes, like sprouting your seeds. The only concern, I think, is going above 107, but you probably won't be doing that. That damages the seed. And then drain the seed before sowing seed. Planting seedlings in rows seems to be a pretty obvious thing, but it really helps with managing your weeding, being able to rogue off types. Just for seed management, it's a way to be able to look at the plants. And this fact, I don't know if it is applicable to this area, but for the Uganda certified seed protocols, they're recommending at least 8 inches apart between rows and 6 inches apart within the rows. So that's pretty close, but this is for a single variety grown in a section. So if you're doing, I know a lot of people are growing rice at further distances apart, so that works too. And then if you're planting multiple rice varieties, we talked about this already a bit. Growing in rows, if you want to grow in rows, make sure that the plants aren't touching. And then the best way probably is to grow little plots of each variety and just select seed from the center of the plots. And then a major part that we've talked about already too is field inspection and roguing off types. So you need to monitor your field regularly so you can see how the plants develop and grow, to be able to make visual comparisons between the varieties and to be able to understand how this variety grows or how it develops over the growing season so that you can be able to identify plants that may be off types or maybe not what you're looking to save seed from. And then it recommends roguing these off types at least once before flowering, which happens around heading time, and then once after. Okay, so these, I won't go all over these traits, but for roguing off types, there's a whole range of characteristics of the plant that you can use. A lot of them are visual, so you can see them in the field. Some of them are more you would probably need a lab to look at them, but we can focus on the easier ones when we're trying to rogue the off types. And like Jim was talking about, if you see that plant that's growing distinctly different than the other ones in the row, you probably want to remove that one right away.
What's on AWN?
Okay, so on, let me go back so we don't. So if you look at the spikelet, some rice varieties have like a little thread. Yeah. So Dvorskian has an on. Yeah. So that's different. A lot of the Hokkaido varieties don't have the on. So that's a way you can distinguish varieties from each other. Okay. Important part. So the first part of seed processing is when to harvest, and there are several ways you can determine when to harvest. When 80 to 85% of the grains have changed from green to straw color, 20% of the grains in the lower part of the panicle are in the hard dough stage, so the seeds are hard. If you're able to measure moisture content, you can figure out moisture content. Or if you just take a grain and hand dehull it, take off the husk, and it's clear and hard, then that's a way to determine when the optimal time is to harvest. And then threshing, a lot of the literature says you should thresh immediately after harvesting, before drying. I know that my father dries it first and then threshes it. And that's, I think, a matter of preference. One thing you need to be concerned about, why they recommend threshing immediately after harvesting, is they don't want you keeping the rice grain in piles where they could be discolored or get some kind of damage before you store the seed. Drying, we talked about this already. You need to dry to below 14% moisture content. It shouldn't be, this is probably not a concern here if you're drying out in the air, but if you wanted to use a mechanical way of drying, you don't want to go above 109 degrees. It can cause, once you get into the high hundreds, you can cause fissuring in the seed and it damages the seed. Okay, and then storage, airtight, protect from cold, moisture, and pests. And then they're recommending if you want to do longer term storage than a few months that you decrease the moisture content in the seed. So that's a little bit of a greater degree of specificity in the moisture content, but it just depends what you have available. Okay, oh, and that's it. So that's what I have today for seed saving.